But in the end, especially the big decisions, it is my gut that rules the day. And I will never make a decision that goes against my gut.
I'm Amy Jo Martin. Welcome to the Why Not Now show. You know that thing you've been thinking about doing? Yeah, that one. Why not now? Have you ever actually taken the time to ask yourself, what's stopping me? Let's talk it through. This is your chance to give that idea the attention it deserves and take action. Each episode, I have a chat with a fascinating person, from entrepreneurs to athletes, celebrities, my parents, rocket scientists, and all walks of life. We talk through a critical time when they've asked themselves, why not now? We dissect that day or even that moment, step by step.
Just let go.
Today we have Jen Wong on the show. She is the Chief Operating Officer at Reddit. And if you're not familiar, Reddit is the 5th most visited website in the United States, with 600 global employees and 430 million average monthly active users. They're a pretty big powerhouse. Now, Jen's career path has been quite interesting. So she started as a consultant at McKinsey, and then she shifted around and she moved into pop culture and media with a career and roles at Pop Sugar and then Time Inc., where she was COO prior to Reddit. And she was also the president of digital at Time. So she's had a variety of different capacities in a variety of different industries. Given the diverse experience, what I appreciate about Jen, and what I think you'll appreciate too, is her unique approach to problem solving and decision making. We talk this through in detail, and Jen shares insight on when she decides to let things play out versus when she decides to step in. And that's one of my favorite questions to ask is, when do you know when to make things happen versus let them happen? Jen talks about how her approach has shifted over the years based on what she's learned and applying that experience. Jen also speaks to the value of diversity in the workplace. So given that she's a leader of a big company, she is navigating real time what the future will look like for the company based on its diversity now. And as she talks about looking around at her peers at other companies who are COOs and the difference that we will see in the near future among companies who choose a more diverse workplace and route and build that out and grow that culture versus those who don't, and what the potential economic impact will have as well. This is a wide-ranging conversation, as most of them are, and we also touch on the topic of leadership, advice, tips that Jen has when it comes to leadership. So without further ado, here is Jen Wong. How we spend our days is how we spend our lives. For me, being able to design my own day is a non-negotiable. As many of you know, I'm a bit of a time management nerd. So when I find something that allows me to be more efficient and more effective, I want to share it with everyone. So here's the scoop. I have a new tool in my productivity tool belt, and I'm a bit obsessed. It's Monday.com. My team and I have never felt more organized, and I have a new sense of perceived control. My to-do list is no longer the boss of me. I feel more in control because every project, initiative, date, and task is captured and organized in one place. And my team is in the loop and involved every step of the way. To get a free trial, head to hey.monday.com/Amy Jo Martin. That's HEY hey.monday.com/Amy Jo Martin. With Monday.com, it's like I have a brand new operating system. There's no long list, and everything has its own home, its own deadline, its own team member that's assigned and associated, and it's color coordinated. We all have multifaceted jobs and businesses. There are many components to my business, and each and every one of them has its own compartment. Each division is always one click away. For example, my team and I have a dedicated board for this very podcast. Did you know there are 28 steps involved in getting one podcast to air? It's the same exact process every time. And it's a system. We have the various key steps mapped out as micro tasks. And this allows for my team and I to stay in lockstep every step of the way. With Monday.com, I can zoom out and see the big picture, a roadmap view from 30,000 feet. And a moment later, I can zoom in and focus on a specific micro task within a project, within a division of the company. I could go on and on about the features that Monday.com offers, one of which is I've built my social media content calendar inside of Monday.com. I finally have one that I actually use, that I like, and it's embedded into my overall Google Calendar. Another feature that I love is the Google Doc integration. You know I love a good spreadsheet. I can pull them into Monday.com and edit them right there versus having 97 tabs open on my computer. If how we spend our days is how we spend our lives, then I can't think of anything more important than using the time in our days wisely. To grab your free trial, head to hey.monday.com/Amy Jo Martin. That's hey.monday.com/Amy Jo Martin. Just check it out. It's free. It's worth it. And let me know on social media if it's working out for you and how it's going. Just shoot me a DM and we can swap tips and tricks. And I did link to that free trial URL just in case you missed it. So take a look in the show notes if you want to click through directly. Jen, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me today. And in the spirit of why not now, let's hop in. Can you tell me about a time when you had a big decision to make and you asked yourself the question, why not now?
You know, when I reflect on that question, I think about 2.5 years ago when I had finished with Time Inc. We had closed the sale to Meredith and I was taking time off. I had a plan. My plan was to take time off, probably 8 to 9 months off between January and September, which I'd never done in my life, never, but was confronted in April with the opportunity to join Reddit much earlier than I wanted to. So not in my plan. I knew I wanted to go to growth, but and I was a bit of an admirer of Reddit, but it was also in a moment when Reddit was still, Steve, the co-founder and CEO, had just come back. I had a young son; he was under a year old, and I knew that would require travel to San Francisco. The role was basically in San Francisco, not in New York, and I live in New York. And I think I was still wrestling with questions like, should I seize an opportunity to become a CEO or do I want to be a COO again? So that was a big decision that kind of was unexpected, I'd say, about 2.5 years ago. Clearly, I made the decision to join Reddit, which has been fantastic. But it took, it was a big process to get there. It was actually faster than I thought, but it was big.
Oh, absolutely. Especially if the timing wasn't exactly aligned with your plan, right? So talk us through, if we were to kind of look under the hood at that decision-making process, what does a big decision like that entail?
For me, my process is I really have to take myself to the edge of the commitment and decision. Like I always say, you have to stand at the cliff with your feet dangling over, you've got everything and you can almost put it on and feel it and wear it. And imagine almost the logistics of it to see okay, how do I viscerally react to being in those shoes. That's kind of my process. It's very, very visceral. And it's interesting because I am a very fact-based person. I am a very rational decision maker. All of those things are true. But in the end, especially the big decisions, it is my gut that rules the day. And I will never make a decision that goes against my gut. It's a horrible feeling. And that's what pushes me over to make the decision.
Oh, I love that. As a COO, I'm thinking like matrix and these spreadsheets, and I'm sure those exist too in some form or fashion. But then I've never really heard that as a tool to like literally kind of try it on and see what that, even physiologically, body intelligence, like cues you're getting, and so I love to talk a little bit about the science of intuition and how, I think for years I ignored. I was just much more kind of give me the data, and someone would say, what's your gut say? And I'd be like, do you have a magic 8-ball? Is that what you mean? Like, what are you talking about? What are some of the cues for you? Because it's such a big word, right? So your gut are there things that happen where you can kind of detail it out, or how does that work?
It's a great question. And I mean, I wish this is actually a good exercise, because having a young son, I think about this a lot. I think about how do you teach him to make decisions that are like aligned with himself internally, right? To have the self-awareness to do that and not go against his quote gut. And I don't, it's like, there's no manual for it. And I sometimes think like, okay, how did my parents teach me, or how did I learn this? And I can't piece it together. But some of the things I've observed are, when you try on these things, I start to play out like the vision of what this looks like. So if you take something like, okay, I may have to be in San Francisco every other week or every week. That means I'm not going to see my son maybe have an actual improvement. When you're that young, you have this behavioral change that can happen in a matter of 4 days. Like they suddenly start speaking a word. They suddenly start walking. Like you could miss those things. Like, how do you feel about that? Right. That's like and then like for me, I had a very visceral reaction to that. Like if you missed your son's first step, like how would you feel? And so things like that. And I could test with myself, like, I would be upset, but I wouldn't be devastated. That's just me. That was my reaction to that. Or you can try on other things like, if I didn't get the time off that I was imagining, what would I lose? Like, what would I not get done, and how would I feel about it? And the one thing I did realize is I was like, okay, well, you didn't really have an agenda other than spending time with your son, which is actually a great agenda. So it's, not as clear. And you'll have to figure out ways to make up that time that you didn't, that focus time that you wanted with your son, which I thought about, like, what would I do? How would I spend it? So again, it's like that process of trying it on really tactically helped me just test in like real potential situations, how I would feel, I think, and how would I feel about myself if I was the parent who wasn't there for X, or I was there, that kind of thing.
Very real, tangible, tactical possibilities. I love that.
Yeah.
Tactically. So you're taking something that oftentimes is so, it's esoteric and it's your intuition, but bringing down into a real reality. I love that tool. Given your career path, and I can only imagine the moments of intensity as your role, but also, the places that you've worked and the things you've been through, going through a sale, acquisition, huge, and then in tech, in these different industries. How do you know when to make something happen versus let it happen, like in a work environment? So how sometimes we just have to push through, and it's like you gotta just grind for a little bit, but then sometimes you do it and you're like, man, I should have known better. Do you have any little tricks for sizing up situations and deciding to go left or right?
It's interesting. More and more I think I'm a very proactive personality. So my tendency is to do something versus nothing. That is like my natural tendency and my hope, I think, when people are confronted with situations. But I've actually tempered that. I've actively tempered that impulse over the last couple of years. I think as I reflect on leadership, and how do you build a company that knows how to make its own decisions without you there, and make good decisions and take action without you there. It's restraint. It's actually sitting back and saying, I'm just going to let this one go and see what happens. And maybe something good will happen. Maybe something I don't want will happen, but maybe there'll be a learning from that. So it won't happen again. Like, I'm just open to more, you could call it chaos or uncertainty, but also potential more long-term gain that could go along with that. So I think I used to focus on like the short-term consequence. And now I try to think about the long game and long-term potential benefit, and maybe some of the good, good outcomes that can come out of it. So that's definitely something that I've changed over time, and I think it's been really healthy.
That's cool. I needed to hear that today, actually. So thank you for the quick therapy. So I've been out of the corporate world, like working in it for many years, and I have this. I've been working with entrepreneurs so much that I'm out of touch of what it's like these days, and I know it's changed massively in the last decade. How do you kind of spot entrepreneurs inside, like on your team, and people who just, they probably could survive really well out there as doing their own thing, but they just have that mind and they love working, under a bigger roof. And how, like, just in general, how does your culture at Reddit, or even a previous company culture where you've worked, kind of foster that? I just think it's such an attractive thing to young talent to be able to spread your wings a bit.
I do think right now there's certainly among young people a real interest in startups and early stage companies. I think because they grow so quickly that you grow along with them. If they grow quickly, you have opportunity that grows with it. That said, having worked at big companies and smaller growth companies, I actually think both are incredibly valuable to a career, and that all personality types can actually work within both. So I actually think you can have what I call a fire starter personality. These are like entrepreneurs. They're like, I'll take two twigs and rub them together and I'm just going to make something from nothing. Like that very entrepreneurial spirit. I actually think large companies need that, and more are embracing those personalities. And obviously startup culture lives, with those people. I think the reverse is also true, that there are people who are not fire starters, but they are just really good, organized operators who get stuff done at scale. And that's a skill. Like getting 500, 1,000 people to align and march to the same tune is a skill, like day after day after day. And a lot of startup and growth companies, well, they eventually get big enough that they need somebody who can do that really systematically. So I actually think personalities work across, both types of companies. And I look for both. I mean, if you're earlier stage, you probably have more fire starters. When you're later stage, you probably still have fire starters, but you also have, people who are really great scaled operators. But I see both as really valuable. And certainly the stage that Reddit's at, we have a mix of both.
It makes sense. And I like the way that you describe that too, of like multiple personalities can work in both scenarios. Speaking of growth, I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts around the notion of a career ladder. You've worked with some incredible organizations. You've had your own pivots out of the financial industry. And if you were to talk to someone just coming out of school right now, what would you tell them about this thing that we call the career ladder?
My own journey has not been so intentional or deliberate or planned, right? I mean, I once upon a time worked in like quantitative finance. I moved toward what I cared about, which was consumer media and tech, because I love creative products. I did a tour through consulting to learn, basic business skills I didn't have and experience. And then I've winded through big and small companies, mostly in consumer media and tech. And I think in all of those cases, what I followed is a product that I understood and liked. That's actually one of the things that's really important to me. I actually think it helps me do my job better. Leaders who I really enjoyed working with, who cared about my growth and I think I could learn from and created opportunity for me. And I've looked at all opportunities in like totality, not from a career ladder point of view. So, we, like many companies, we have career ladders, but they're very linear, right? There's a career ladder for communications. There's a career ladder for sales. And that presumes that you start at the bottom of that ladder and you walk your way up that ladder. And when you look at most people's careers, they end up on 3, 4, 5 ladders, right? And then it doesn't look like a ladder anymore. I don't know what you call it, but it's not really this linear ladder with like 5 rungs on it. So, I think ladders can provide information and some guideposts, but I think the reality is that people will jump from one to the other and your path is more windy. And, for me, it's been about, is this something I care about can I be successful? And I think success is a lot tied to one, judging the business, but then also your personal like landing spot. Like, who are you working for? Who is the leadership? Who is offering you sponsorship? What are you going to be able to learn and do here that you couldn't do somewhere else? That when you look for the next job, you're going to say, guess what I did at the last one? I did X, Y, Z. Because I think of careers really as learning. It's like, what skills did you learn? And sometimes it's just not linear.
And progress is not linear, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Experience is just not. Yeah.
Up and to the right, hopefully that chart line is going. But and that career collateral, it is somewhat transferable. I mean, looking at how many people just realize after climbing they've been leaning their ladder against the wrong wall, or they're like, wait a minute, but that doesn't necessarily mean starting at the bottom.
Right.
Let's talk about Reddit a bit. Let's talk about just tech and social media, and it's this interesting thing called the pandemic and COVID, and just what are some of the things that you've noticed in terms of impact and changes or trends that COVID has had on tech or even social or communities online?
It's been fascinating to see. I mean, there's nothing like what we've all been through this year. It's a moment where I think, especially in March and April and May, there was incredible amount of dislocation, right? You're sent home to quarantine. People, a lot of people had suboptimal living situations, roommates, small apartments, fragile living situations, just kids, parents, so many things. And I think what we saw is people were just hungry for connection and in need of information. And the cool thing about communities is they respond so quickly to very specific needs because they just reflect what people are thinking, like in real life. So in March, you have a community like r/coronavirus, which had gone from 50,000 subscribers to like 2.3 million. And it's moderated by epidemiologists and doctors. And people are going in there because it's a novel virus and they're just like worried about health, right? And then a week later, people are like, what's happening with my equity portfolio, my stocks? And hey, I can't get bread and toilet paper, like help. Or I'm in homeschooling now with like my 5-year-old, like Zoom, like what do I do? And every week there was like change in people's lives where they were like, I need help. And what's amazing is that there was always a community and a set of people going through the same thing that would help answer those questions. Like you could see every single question, issue, like just start to show up week by week. It was like, homeschooling, then baking, then sports, like going away, and then haircuts. And then, right. It was almost like, I think Doug McMillan from Walmart was saying like, oh, we can see all the things that are happening in quarantine. We saw the same thing within communities.
Oh,
And I
interesting.
think people got a lot of solace and a lot of help from it, and they continue to get a lot of help from it. I know I did.
What a interesting bird's eye view of a social experiment in a weird way, like with Reddit and with all your different communities. And did you find that they would splinter off into niche down more and more, or
Yeah.
they stay pretty general? No. Okay.
No, very specific. So, people who had curly hair, right, and couldn't go to a hairdresser, they had like curly hair. That was like a very specific thing, like male grooming. Like, how do you cut, your
Yeah.
hair when you have to have layers and clippers? I mean, that was like a very specific thing. I mean,
Fascinating.
weddings being called off. What do you do? How do I have a quarantine wedding? Right? What are ideas for that? I mean, unbelievable things that people needed help with that you
Oh,
can't even think of. Like, you can't even imagine. Oh, of course that's an issue.
and it'll show up, right? You can expect
Yeah.
for it to show up
And it
if
shows
it
up,
has.
and somebody it probably shares that problem and is already problem solving against it.
Yeah, and the data and the moderation. So that's such an important part. I was fairly early on to adopt social media back when I think the Twitter office had 11 people at the time. And you could just call them up and be like, hey. And the change has been mind blowing, just on all angles, human behavior as well as the technology itself. And I guess I have a very general question for you, but where do you see governance and regulation headed?
All platforms, they're all really different. Like, I think we talk about social platforms as a monolith,
Mm-hmm.
but they're all so different. And
Mm-hmm.
Reddit is so different. I mean, I don't think anybody else has a system of communities where all content goes through communities, and where they have, 3 to 100 moderators in these communities setting rules and
Mm-hmm.
sharing the governance with, the users and with Reddit Inc. It just doesn't exist. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think ultimately each platform has to be responsible for its own presence. And, we take a very different view on moderation. Our principles are that we share that responsibility with our moderators and with our users through mechanisms like voting up or down and setting rules in communities and having moderators be able to enforce. I think the second is we really believe that to scale globally, you need to allow room for nuance, right? There's just users and moderators are much closer to the content. So if you're in a community for skincare, they're the closest and best to, what, we want to talk about skincare, but we don't want to give medical advice. We're not comfortable with that. This post looks like it's requesting medical advice. We're going to disallow it, right? That is something that community has set up for itself and is best placed to moderate. And so I think there is, a balance. And I think we take that point of view, and we think it allows for higher quality conversation and for scale.
Mm-hmm.
It is challenging. I mean, the volume that we deal with, the breadth of topics, like, it's absolutely challenging. But ultimately, I think each one is responsible, in its own way for its own tools.
Mm-hmm. It's a great point. And I almost hesitated to even put Reddit in the bucket of social media because it is so different. It kind of is its own.
Yeah. We
But
call
of
ourselves
course,
community. Yeah.
yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Very unique in that way with the moderation governance. And I hope to see more platforms take more responsibility too. Anyway, so what's one thing, Jen, that you find yourself learning over and over again?
I mean, there's a number of things actually. One for me is one is the one I mentioned before, which is like giving space for decisions and letting things play out, versus like stepping in. I think for me, like I said, I tend to have this proactive personality. And I think that comes in, wanting to problem solve quickly, do things sometimes myself because it might be expedient. But, I've really worked on, and I still continue to work on, just, the balance of stepping in and just creating space for others to learn and take charge in terms of, well, mainly for learning and for scale. So I think that's one that I constantly am like metering myself on.
Do you find that you're conserving more energy by taking that approach?
I actually, in some ways, it takes more energy
Do you think it?
to be,
Wow, you
yeah,
just
to it takes more energy to be intentional and thoughtful about, is this the right balance, right? And what is the right approach? It's almost like, so, my MO, in the spirit of being, proactive, like I have an idea in my head or something I remember, and I just want to send the email or get it out quickly.
Mhm.
But, sometimes that's like 2 a.m. on a Saturday, and that could be a really stressful email to receive, right? So I have to self-filter myself to say, okay, I'll put it in my outbox or I'll boomerang it and save it for later, et cetera, right? But that takes like extra
Gotcha.
effort
Yeah.
to be intentional and say, wait a second, you should not be sending this at this hour. It's not necessary because you're not expecting a response at this hour. It's just that you want to get it out of your system at this hour. Right. So it takes that extra step of thought to be like, okay, don't do that. Like, do this instead. So in that
Gotcha.
sense, it actually takes more.
It does take more. That's really interesting. I think about reacting and how I don't know if you've ever heard of the Colby testing. It's kind of like Enneagram or Myers-Briggs or whatever, but
Mm-hmm.
there's 4 numbers, and one of which is all about, they call it innovation, and there's a 1 to 10, and I happen to be a 10 in quick start, which is
Mm-hmm.
rare to be a 10. It just means you just kind of go, and that means I can false start very quickly too, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a good thing, but it's
Mm-hmm.
also obviously and I've been trying to work on that, and I feel like conserved a little bit of energy to not have to false start. But I see what you're saying in terms of
Yeah.
like having to kind of retrace
Yeah.
your steps a little bit. So in terms of just when you think about, the type of situation that we're in right now, with a lot of dynamics happening globally as well as nationally, with Reddit in general, I mean, this is unknown territory, right? Like, we're experiencing things. Do you have like a task team inside that's just focused on innovation and what's going to pop up the next day? Or how are you dealing with being, nimble with such a big organization, and especially in your role as a COO? Like, how do you take this something like a cruise ship and start to operate every once in a while? Like, you need to make quick turns.
So in terms of like the being able to navigate, dynamically, I think we actually did that this year. I think most companies actually did that this year, between like the pandemic and, social justice issues, the election. I mean, there's just a lot going on this year. Volatility in the market. I think we actually did that this year. It almost was the training ground to prove to ourselves that we could like pull back, pull forward, and emotionally weather that, and as a company weather that kind of whiplash. And I actually think we did a good job, but we learned almost by doing this year. I'm not sure it actually built our confidence that we can weather the next volatility of the next 6 months really well. In terms of innovation, I am a fan of having really dedicated resources and focus against something, where they just do nothing but focus on it for some period of time. Not necessarily an innovation team, but a team that is like doing something. We did this at Reddit. We decided that we were going to build our own live streaming experience a little over a year ago. And that's a big undertaking. It's a hard piece of technology. And we gave a room to a killer team, and we were like, build this.
Figure it out.
And they did. And they did, right? We have RPM, which is a live streaming experience. It's become really core to Reddit. We just put them in a room. We're like, this is the only thing you need to deliver. And I think you can do that. You just, clear some of the things that might be distractions in terms of having to deal with the rest of the org. Now that can be hard too, because in the end they have to plug into the app and the org and all of that. But we found that to be really successful.
It's interesting what you said about the dedicated focus too. I imagine, right? Like this is definitely the priority. And so let's talk productivity a little bit. What are some of your top go-to tips or tricks, your hacks personally? Just in terms of being able to get the most out of your day, make the most impact. Any rules that you live by?
Sleep.
Mm.
I am not a late night person. I always get my sleep. I just the impact per minute goes up. It's just much higher if I have proper sleep. So I have learned not to make that trade off. So as a result, I don't dawdle during the day, but I don't go to bed late, and so that is a real rule for me. Like I go to bed sometimes shockingly early. So that's one. Is sleep is definitely the power move for productivity.
Do you have a sweet
Um,
spot for how many hours?
8 hours.
8. Mhm.
8 hours. Yeah. The other for me is, I do my best thinking in the morning. So I think everybody has a biorhythm. Some people are late night owls and some people are morning. I am a morning person. I do my best thinking. So that's the time that I try to reserve for, okay, I need to respond to decision documents thoughtfully. I need to imbibe data and just kind of sort through in my head some, issues or whatever it is. I resolve all my hard problem solving. I reserve it for the morning. The afternoon, I'm tired, but that's when I do meetings. Meetings for me are not, they can be tiring because you're talking, but they're not mentally taxing typically. So that works better for me is to do meetings, at the end of the day. So that's just like my general rhythm, and I think it really optimizes for what I'm best at what hour. So I take a day part approach.
So smart. I love that. And when it comes to meetings, do you have any things that you do to run your meetings that keep them as efficient as possible and effective?
About a year or so ago, Steve and I, like we moved into this process. It's sort of like an amended Amazon process where we have decision documents and a lot more documentation in meeting. So if you have a decision, it just very clearly says who's responsible for deciding, who are the stakeholders, what's the context and background, what's the data. Please write your opinions here. Here's the discussion. Let's answer questions. Here's the decision. Everybody, please put a check mark here. And I think what that did is number one, you can read much faster than you can speak and listen. So you can imbibe a lot more information in the same amount of time and have a higher quality set of facts and processing that happens when you're reading. The second is it really forces people to take ownership of their comments when you write it in a document.
Mhm.
And while that can be hard, I think that is ultimately very healthy. And because it's written, I think if you have dominant personalities verbally in a conversation, they don't really dominate a conversation that's written. Um,
Smart. Yeah.
and then the third is that because it's all documented and there's a check mark at the end, et cetera, you just don't have revisionist history because you have an artifact that you can go back to and say, but we made this decision and everybody agreed to it and it wasn't even raised here or it was raised here, but we decided to, decide this anyway. And I find it really efficient and also just really healthy.
It's really fascinating. And are these, I imagine they vary in length, but is the goal to keep them fairly brief? So, I mean, so you can sift through quickly?
Probably one page vertical.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's so interesting. It's like almost having it, like you said, an archive or like a company historian too, because you could go back and be like, how did we get here? Well, let's look at these 4 documents because they led.
Well, when somebody starts, I send them decision documents because I think it helps inform why do we do things, right? The way that we do, and it gives them a texture of people's perspectives and how that decision came about. It is sort of a chronicle.
Has it cut down on the volume of meetings?
It has because you can make decisions asynchronously with it. And sometimes we'll just say, we don't need a meeting. Let's just put the comments in. This is straightforward. We all agree.
Oh, Talk about time saver in a lot of ways. Very interesting. Let's shift briefly to just the value of diversity in the workplace and in general, kind of what you've learned throughout your career, what you've witnessed at some different companies, which I'm sure have had different cultures and they were at different times of where our culture is at the moment. And just in general, given the times that we're in.
I mean, this is an area where we're investing quite a lot at Reddit, and I'm really, really pleased with the progress we've made. We have a very tight, like 30, 60 day, 90 roadmap. And when we commit to doing something, like we really commit, like we're not a company that says something and then doesn't do it. Like if we say something, this is why we tend to be cautious about what we say and commit to, because we really do it. It's hard work and it's long work. Like it's nothing happens overnight. I think there's a lot of work to be done in tech companies. And my perspective is there's no point in diversifying your pipeline if those people come and are unhappy and you aren't inclusive. Like just don't bother. It's like almost worse, don't bother to do it. And I think the inclusion part is in some ways almost the harder part, because it's about turning a mirror on yourself, and your leadership in terms of, your own culture and the things that you do on a day-to-day basis and how people feel as a result of that. I think after the murder of George Floyd and BLM, I do feel a real shift among companies, big and small, in terms of their awareness of what needs to be done. I still think there's a range of real action versus rhetoric. And I think that will play out in the next 6 to 12 months. I think you will see some companies that have really done the work and some that have not. And I think those that have done the work, I believe, will reap real business benefits. They will be talent magnets. They will have really proud employees. In the war for talent, I think they will be more successful. So I really believe it's a tremendous differentiator and asset. And I think you're going to start to see some differentiation probably over the next couple of years for those who have made the investment.
It's such a good point. And it will be known, right? There's
It will be
no
known.
hiding that.
Yeah.
It will be very known.
Yeah. It will be known because the companies that have done it well will have access to networks that others don't. And it will be so clear that they have access to those talent pools and networks and others don't.
At your level within the company and also with this focus and the quick roadmap, do you collaborate and kind of compare notes with other companies who are being just as aggressive, with individuals at that C-suite level to kind of almost link arms and say, okay, this is working. We're going to try this. They're kind of an informal cohort.
Yeah, I think all of my peers and all of the execs at Reddit have a network of peers who they can talk to about, issues and how people are approaching things. Because, while we're sort of, we have plenty of competitors, in the end, I think, all companies are unique and talent flows between them. And any, sharing advice or joint or aspirations and how to achieve those aspirations, like it tends to be more friendly than competitive. I mean, sharing code is competitive, but sharing like ideas and approaches is not. And we tend to, I think there's a lot of good collaboration and information that helps you kind of sanity check. Like I think COVID is a great example, right? Nobody really knows what to do about their offices and what's going to happen with remote work, et cetera. But I think everybody's talking about it and trying to understand it and sharing notes on sentiment and how people are feeling. I mean, ultimately, everyone will make a decision which is right for their company, but that information is helpful. And I think people are being open in a very uncertain environment.
As someone who's responsible for operations, what has been your biggest surprise about remote working? Positive or negative, but just You wouldn't have known until you did it, right?
Yeah. Well, I am the only remote member of the exec team. And so I used to fly, every other week to San Francisco, certainly for the exec meetings. There were moments when I couldn't fly, and so I would do it remotely. And it's not great being the only person remote or even having 2 or 3 people remote when everybody else is together. And I think now that everyone's remote and you see the tiled screen and it feels very equal, it makes you really want to revise the experience of part remote, part in person.
Interesting.
Because it's not a very even conversational field. Like I've become so much more conscious of that differential. So I think that when people return to work and you have a split between remote working and people in the office, let's say you have a meeting of 6 people, 3 and 3 or something like that, I think that's going to require a redo to be equalizing and feel good. Like maybe everyone has to still be on a screen or something. So I think that's something I've observed. I do think that remote work is really, and just period of time, certainly for me and for a lot of people, they've opened their aperture on their life in general, not only their personal life, their work life, really widely in terms of the possibilities. That includes where they work and how they interact with work in an office, et cetera. So, I am expecting a wide range of flexibility, interest, and just configurations. And, I think we want to support people in that. Like, I think most of that, not everything works, but quite a bit can work is what I think we've learned from this.
What an exciting area of innovation and just getting to try different things, experiment, as you work through this. I bet you're glad you have the decision documents now pre-COVID because it probably has helped streamline a lot of things. Okay, so I have a couple of just quick rapid fire questions if you're
Sure. Okay.
What keeps you up at night?
The election.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, deep breath there. I know. And we're in it, right? It's the first time where you feel like we're so in it right now. Yeah. Okay. What's one thing you've read recently or heard? Maybe it's a book, maybe it's an article, it could have been something on Reddit that really inspired you.
I read Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. It is unbelievable to think about his life and where he has ended up. Like the probabilities of how that all happened and unfolded. It's stunning. It's hilarious. It's in his voice, and it's hilarious. But it is an unbelievable story, and it is a story about race, right? I mean, it's about his upbringing in South Africa. It's very profound. So I think there's a lot of learning there as well. It's a great book. I encourage everyone to read it. A lot of learning.
That's awesome. And just to wrap up here, if you were to go give some advice to Jen in, it's been 2.5 years or 3 years since you were at Time, pre-decision to head to Reddit, what advice would you give to yourself before that big decision?
Your son will always know that you're his mom, no matter how much time you spend with him and whether you're there for his first steps or not. Like, that is like one of the paranoid thoughts you have is like, will I be important? Will I be around enough to be remembered and significant? And when I reflect on that, I'm like, yes, of course. Like, he knows who his mom is, despite worries about that. Yeah.
Oh, I needed to hear that today too. So thank you so much. I'm sure a lot of listeners are in the same boat. Thank you so much for your time and your wisdom, Jen. I appreciate it. And we'll be just following along your journey. And I appreciate you joining us. Hey everyone, thanks for listening to the show. Hit me up on social media to let me know what you think. I'm at Amy Jo Martin on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And I want to hear your Why Not Now moments so I can share them on the show. Just send me a note to whynotnow@amyjomartin.com. For show notes and other offers, you can visit amyjomartin.com/whynotnow. And while you're there, don't forget to sign up for my email newsletter for exclusive content and announcements. A big thanks to Rock Salt Music for all of the tunes by the talented John Coggins, and of course a hat tip to Richard Brewer for editing and producing the show. I'll see you next time, and until then, why not now?